Hi there, I'm the Sleepy Storyteller. Welcome back to my channel where I share the most bone-chilling true tales that will keep you up at night. Make sure you're comfortable, maybe leave a light on because tonight's story is particularly unsettling. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss one of my terrifying tales. Tonight's story comes from a small town in New England, where old money and even older secrets tend to hide behind pristine white picket fences and immaculately maintained Victorian homes. This is the story of the perfect maid. The Hartwick family had everything: a beautiful historic home on Maple Street, respected positions in the community, and enough wealth to ensure their comfort for generations to come. James Hartwick was a successful investment banker, while his wife, Eleanor, managed several charitable foundations. Their twin children, Sophia and Samuel, were honor students at the prestigious local private academy. From the outside looking in, they were the picture-perfect American family. But maintaining perfection requires help, and the Hartwicks had gone through 7 housekeepers in the past 2 years. Eleanor was known to be particular. Some would say impossible to please. The local domestic staffing agency had actually refused to send any more candidates their way. That's when Amelia Blackwood appeared at their doorstep one foggy October morning, resume in hand. "I heard you might be in need of household assistance," she said, her voice soft but confident. Something about her was immediately different from the other applicants. She stood with perfect posture, dressed in a simple but immaculate black dress, her dark hair pulled back into a tight bun that emphasized her sharp, pale features. Eleanor was suspicious at first. "Who referred you to us?" "No one in particular," Amelia replied with a thin smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Word gets around in small towns, doesn't it? About families in need of specific services." There was something both comforting and unsettling about Amelia. Her references were impeccable. Former employers who raved about her attention to detail, her discretion, and her seemingly supernatural ability to anticipate needs before they were expressed. Eleanor couldn't reach 2 of the references by phone, but the glowing recommendation letters seemed legitimate enough. Amelia was hired that afternoon. From the very first day, it was clear that Amelia was unlike any housekeeper they'd employed before. She arrived at precisely 6 a.m. each morning, though no one ever saw her coming up the driveway. The house, which had always been clean under previous staff, now gleamed with an almost otherworldly perfection. Dust didn't dare settle on surfaces. Floors reflected like still water. Even the air seemed fresher, carrying a subtle scent of lavender and something else. Something older and earthy that Eleanor couldn't quite identify. The children were the first to notice that something was off about their new maid. "Mom," Sophia whispered one evening after dinner, "I think Amelia watches me while I sleep." Eleanor dismissed it as a child's imagination. "Don't be ridiculous, sweetheart. Amelia goes home at night." "Does she?" Samuel chimed in. "Because I woke up at 3 a.m. last night and saw her standing at the end of the hallway, just staring at the family photos." James laughed it off. "She probably just forgot something and came back to get it. Besides, she's the best housekeeper we've ever had. Let's not rock the boat." The boat, however, was already beginning to rock. Strange things started happening around the house. Items would go missing, nothing valuable, just personal things. A baby tooth Eleanor had saved from the twins, a lock of hair from Samuel's first haircut, a dried corsage from Sophia's first dance. Eleanor confronted Amelia, who denied any knowledge with a placid smile. "Perhaps you simply misplaced them, Mrs. Hartwick. Memory can be such a fragile thing, especially in homes with history." The emphasis Amelia placed on history sent a chill down Eleanor's spine, though she couldn't explain why. As the weeks passed, the Hartwicks found themselves increasingly dependent on Amelia. She didn't just clean and cook. She began handling the household accounts, scheduling appointments, even suggesting adjustments to the children's routines that would optimize their development. Strangely, the family found themselves agreeing to her suggestions without much thought, as if her words carried some subtle weight that bypassed their conscious decision-making. One night, during a dinner party with the most influential families in town, Eleanor overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "The Hartwicks were lucky to get her," whispered Margaret Thompson, the wife of the local judge. "After what happened with the Crawfords and the Bennets." "Shoo," hushed her husband. "We don't speak of that." When Eleanor pressed them for details later, they acted confused, claiming they'd been discussing a local landscaper. But Eleanor knew what she'd heard. That night, she searched online for any information about Amelia Blackwood. Nothing came up. No social media profiles, no public records, nothing to suggest the woman existed at all. Expanding her search to include the families Margaret had mentioned, she found something disturbing. Both the Crawford and Bennett families had moved away suddenly within the past 5 years, selling their historic homes at significantly reduced prices. There were vague mentions of family tragedies, but no specifics. Eleanor closed her laptop, unsettled. Outside her study window, she caught a glimpse of movement in the garden. Standing perfectly still among the rose bushes was Amelia, her face turned upward toward Eleanor's window, that same thin smile on her lips, visible even in the dim moonlight. But what disturbed Eleanor most wasn't Amelia's presence in their garden well past midnight. It was the fact that when their eyes met, Amelia didn't look away or act surprised. She nodded as if she'd been expecting Eleanor to be watching, as if this was all going according to plan. The next morning, Eleanor woke with a throbbing headache and the vague memory of unsettling dreams. When she went downstairs, Amelia was already in the kitchen, brewing coffee that filled the house with an enticing aroma. "Good morning, Mrs. Hartwick," Amelia said without turning around. "You didn't sleep well. I've prepared your coffee stronger than usual. You'll need it today." Eleanor froze in the doorway. "How did you know I didn't sleep well?" Amelia turned, that same placid smile on her face. "It's written all over you, ma'am. Dark circles, tension in your shoulders. I'm observant. It's part of what makes me the perfect maid." Something about the way Amelia said perfect made Eleanor's skin crawl. "I'd like to speak with you about boundaries, Amelia," Eleanor said, trying to sound authoritative despite the unease creeping up her spine. "The children mentioned seeing you in the house late at night." "Children have such active imaginations," Amelia replied, setting down Eleanor's coffee. "Though this house does have a way of playing tricks on the mind. The previous owners knew that well." "The previous owners?" Eleanor asked. "The Richardsons? We bought the house from them 15 years ago. They moved to Florida." "Did they?" Amelia tilted her head slightly. "How interesting. Sugar?" Before Eleanor could press further, James entered the kitchen, already dressed for work. "Morning, ladies." "Amelia, the house looks spectacular as always." "Thank you, Mr. Hartwick," Amelia replied, her demeanor shifting subtly to something more deferential. "I aim to please." Throughout the day, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She tried calling the Richardsons. They had exchanged Christmas cards for a few years after the sale, but the number was disconnected. A quick internet search revealed an obituary for Robert Richardson dated 3 years prior. Heart attack, apparently. His wife had died just 6 months after they moved to Florida. Sudden illness, unspecified. Eleanor felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. She decided to dive deeper into researching the house's history, something she'd never bothered to do before. At the local historical society, she discovered that the land their home stood on had once belonged to a family named Blackwood in the late 1800s. The Blackwood family had employed a young maid who was accused of practicing witchcraft after the family's children began falling ill. According to the records, the maid, whose first name had been smudged in the old documents, though the last letter looked like an L, was hanged from an oak tree on the property. Shortly after, the remaining Blackwood family members died under mysterious circumstances, and the house burned to the ground. The current house had been built on the same foundation in 1920, with several families coming and going since then. None had stayed longer than 20 years. Eleanor's research was interrupted by a text message from James, coming home early, not feeling well. When she arrived home, she found James in bed with a high fever. "It hit me all at once," he mumbled, his eyes glassy. "Like nothing I've ever felt before." "I've prepared a remedy," came Amelia's voice from the doorway. She held a steaming mug of something that smelled of herbs and something metallic. "An old family recipe, excellent for fevers." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "No, thank you. I'm taking James to the doctor." Something dark flashed across Amelia's features before the placid smile returned. "As you wish, Mrs. Hartwick. Though modern medicine has its limitations, especially for unusual ailments." At the hospital, the doctors were puzzled by James's condition. His fever was dangerously high, but they could find no apparent cause. No infection, no virus, nothing to explain his rapid deterioration. They admitted him for observation and to run more tests. When Eleanor returned home that night, the twins were already in bed. Amelia was in the kitchen, preparing a late dinner for Eleanor. "The children were quite upset about their father," Amelia said, stirring something in a pot that filled the kitchen with an unfamiliar, almost sweet odor. "I took the liberty of giving them some warm milk to help them sleep. They won't be disturbed now." "You what?" Eleanor snapped. "You don't give my children anything without my permission, do you understand?" Of course, Mrs. Hartwick, Amelia replied, unfazed by Eleanor's outburst. I only wanted to help. The children need their rest, especially now. Things will be getting more difficult. What is that supposed to mean? Eleanor demanded. Family illness is always a trying time, Amelia said simply. I only meant that you'll all need your strength. Please eat something. Eleanor looked down at the bowl Amelia had set before her. A thick stew with ingredients she couldn't quite identify. I'm not hungry. You should eat, Amelia insisted, her voice taking on an edge Eleanor hadn't heard before. To keep up your strength. I said I'm not hungry, Eleanor repeated, standing up. I'm going to check on the children. They're sleeping soundly, Amelia said, stepping between Eleanor and the doorway. Best not to disturb them. For a moment, the two women stared at each other. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air outside. Amelia's eyes seemed different somehow, darker, with an odd sheen like oil on water. Move aside, Amelia, Eleanor said, her voice low. Now. To her surprise, Amelia complied with a slight nod. As you wish. But remember, Mrs. Hartwick, I'm only looking out for the family's best interests. It's what I was brought here to do. Brought here? By whom? Eleanor asked. Amelia's smile returned, enigmatic and cold. By necessity, Mrs. Hartwick. This house. It always gets what it needs. Eleanor hurried upstairs, her heart pounding. She found the twins in their respective rooms, sleeping so deeply that they didn't stir even when she shook them gently. Their breathing was steady, but their skin was cool to the touch, too cool. On Sophia's nightstand was an empty glass with a residue of white liquid and something dark at the bottom. Panicking, Eleanor tried to wake her children with increasing desperation. When they wouldn't respond, she ran for her phone to call an ambulance. As she reached for her phone on her bedside table, she noticed something that made her blood freeze in her veins. On her pillow lay 3 items: a baby tooth, a lock of hair, and a dried corsage, the missing mementos. Arranged around them in a circle was a fine white powder. From downstairs came the sound of Amelia's voice, no longer soft and deferential, but singing in a language Eleanor didn't recognize, something ancient and guttural. And beneath that sound, Eleanor could swear she heard the old oak tree outside her window creaking, its branches scratching against the glass like skeletal fingers trying to get in. She wasn't just dealing with an unusual housekeeper. She was dealing with something that had been waiting a very, very long time for the right family to serve. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she dialed 911, her eyes fixed on the ritual arrangement on her pillow. The dispatcher's voice sounded distant, underwater, as Eleanor frantically explained that her children wouldn't wake up. Ma'am, we'll send an ambulance right away. Are the children breathing? Yes, but they're so cold. Please hurry. As Eleanor gave her address, the lights in the bedroom flickered once, twice, and then plunged the room into darkness. Her phone died mid-sentence, though she charged it fully at the hospital. They won't come in time, Amelia's voice came from the doorway. She held a candle, its flame casting her face in sharp, distorted shadows. No one ever does. What have you done to my children? Eleanor demanded, backing away until she hit the wall. Given them peace, Amelia replied. The kind of peace this house has been denied for generations. The kind of peace I have been denied. Eleanor lunged for the bedside lamp, desperate for light, but it remained dead despite her frantic clicking. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling through the eaves like a woman in mourning. This house belongs to me, Amelia continued, stepping into the room. It always has. The Blackwoods built it with blood money, my blood. Did you think I wouldn't return? Did you think a rope could hold me forever? For the first time, Eleanor saw Amelia clearly, not as she pretended to be, but as she truly was. In the candlelight, her neck showed a dark, bruised line that circled it completely. Her eyes were no longer human, but black pools that reflected nothing, not even the candle's flame. You're her, Eleanor whispered. The maid they hanged. Amelia Blackwood, she confirmed with a cold smile. Not the family's servant, their daughter. But they couldn't accept that their precious bloodline had produced someone like me. Someone with gifts. So they invented a tale about a witch maid, hanged me from the oak, and buried me in unconsecrated ground. She moved closer, the candle's flame suddenly growing, illuminating the room with an unnatural blue light. Every 20 years I choose a family. A perfect family to replace the one that betrayed me. The Crawfords wouldn't do, too weak. The Bennets came closer. But your family... She inhaled deeply as if savoring a scent. Your family has the right essence. Eleanor made a dash for the door, but it slammed shut before she could reach it. On the other side, she could hear the continuing low, rhythmic chanting, though Amelia stood before her. It was as if the house itself had begun to sing. "You can't escape what's already begun," Amelia said calmly. "Look outside." Against her better judgment, Eleanor turned toward the window. The ancient oak tree in their yard had changed. Its branches now twisted in impossible patterns, forming what looked like a massive, gnarled face. Its roots had partly emerged from the ground, like limbs clawing their way out of a grave. "The tree remembers," Amelia whispered. "It drank my blood, and now it thirsts for more." A branch scraped against the glass with deliberate, sentient movement. The glass began to crack. "Why us?" Eleanor asked, desperately trying to buy time to think of a way out. "Why my family?" "Because you're guilty," Amelia replied simply. "All of you. Your husband's investment firm funded the demolition of the original Blackwood Cemetery 5 years ago, the last physical reminder of my family. The bodies were moved, the headstones discarded. My resting place was disturbed for a shopping mall." Eleanor shook her head in confusion. "James wouldn't." "He knew," Amelia cut her off sharply. "The documents crossed his desk. He signed them without a second thought. Money matters more than respect for the dead, doesn't it? And your children, they have the gift. Like me. But you've been suppressing it, medicating it away. Calling it anxiety and night terrors when they've been seeing the truth all along." A horrible realization dawned on Eleanor. The twins had always been sensitive, often speaking of seeing people who weren't there, knowing things they couldn't possibly know. The family doctor had diagnosed them with overactive imaginations and prescribed mild sedatives for their episodes. "They're not like you," Eleanor insisted. "Aren't they?" Amelia laughed, a sound like dry leaves scraping stone. "Why do you think I chose this house? This family? Blood calls to blood, Mrs. Hartwick. Did you never research your family tree? The Hartwicks and the Blackwoods intertwined long ago. Your children are my descendants, the last of my line." A splintering crash came from the twins' rooms. Eleanor screamed and ran toward the sound, somehow finding the strength to push past Amelia. In the hallway, branches had broken through both windows, wrapping around the children's beds like giant, wooden hands. "No!" Eleanor screamed, grabbing at the branches, cutting her hands on the rough bark. "Leave them alone." "They're not being harmed," Amelia said, following behind at a leisurely pace. "They're being awakened. The tree is giving back what you tried to take from them." The branches had lifted Sophia and Samuel slightly off their beds, cradling them. As Eleanor watched in horror, her children's eyes opened simultaneously, but they weren't the familiar blue eyes she knew. They were solid black, just like Amelia's. "Mom?" Sophia spoke, but her voice had an odd echo, as if someone else were speaking through her. "We can see everything now. The whole world is different," Samuel added in the same resonant voice. "It's beautiful." Eleanor collapsed to her knees between the two beds. "Please," she begged Amelia. "Take me instead. Let them go." Amelia placed a cold hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "It doesn't work that way. The children belong to the house now. To me. To the tree. But don't worry, you still have a role to play." From downstairs came the sound of breaking glass. The paramedics had arrived and were forcing entry into the house. Amelia's expression hardened. "They can't interfere," she hissed. The temperature in the room plummeted, frost forming on the windows and walls in intricate patterns that resembled faces frozen in screams. "We won't let them take us," Sophia said, sitting up in bed though the branches still wrapped around her. "We know what to do now." The twins began to chant in unison, the same guttural language Amelia had been using. The house responded with deep, groaning noises, like massive beams shifting. "What's happening?" Eleanor cried. "The house is sealing itself," Amelia explained with pride, looking at the twins. "They learn so quickly. Soon no one will be able to enter or leave until the ritual is complete." From below came shouts of confusion, then alarm. Eleanor heard heavy boots on the stairs, flashlight beams sweeping the darkened hallway. For a moment, hope flared in her chest. But when the paramedics reached the top of the stairs, they froze, their faces contorting in terror at something Eleanor couldn't see. They backed away, stumbling over each other in their haste to retreat. One man's scream cut off abruptly, followed by a sickening thud. "The past always catches up," Amelia whispered into Eleanor's ear. "Even if it takes 100 years." Outside, the oak tree's branches had encircled the entire second floor of the house, sealing them in a wooden cage. And in the yard below, the ground had begun to split open, revealing what looked like aged, broken headstones rising from the earth, graves that had never been there before, now pushing their way back into the world of the living. Eleanor's world had shattered into fragments of nightmare. Through the frost-covered windows, she could see police cars arriving, their lights casting eerie blue and red patterns across the front lawn where tombstones continued to push up through the manicured grass like rotten teeth through gums. Officers approached the house cautiously, weapons drawn, but stopped short as the ground shifted beneath their feet. The oak tree's roots had spread beneath the entire property, creating a network that pulsed with unnatural life. Every few seconds, the house would groan and shift as if breathing. Plaster cracked along the walls, revealing not the expected wooden studs, but something that looked disturbingly like bones. The house remembers its true form, Amelia explained, noticing Eleanor's horrified gaze. It was built from the remains of the original Blackwood home, and from parts of the family that didn't survive the fire. The twins had risen from their beds, the branches that had cradled them now twining around their small arms like loving vines. They moved in perfect synchronization, heads tilted at identical angles as they studied their mother with detached curiosity. "You look afraid, Mother," Samuel said, his voice still carrying that unsettling echo. "Don't be. This is a rebirth." "We can show you," Sophia added, extending a branch-wrapped hand toward Eleanor. "You can see what we see." Eleanor backed away until she hit the wall. "This isn't you, sweetheart. It's her. She's controlling you somehow." Amelia laughed softly. "I'm not controlling anyone. I'm simply removing the barriers you placed in their minds. The medications, the therapy sessions to convince them their visions weren't real. You were the one controlling them, Mrs. Hartwick." A series of loud bangs came from downstairs, police attempting to break down the front door. But the wood had grown seamless, merging with the frame. "They're persistent," Amelia remarked. "But futile. No one enters the house now without the tree's permission." As if in response, a horrible scream erupted from outside, followed by shouts of alarm. Through the window, Eleanor glimpsed an officer being dragged across the lawn by undulating roots, pulled inexorably toward the base of the oak. "Stop this," Eleanor begged. "They've done nothing to you." "They protect the status quo," Amelia replied coldly. "They would destroy what they don't understand, just as my family did to me. The cycle ends tonight." The twins had moved to the window, their expressions rapt as they watched the chaos below. "It's almost time," Sophia said. "Father is coming home." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "James is in the hospital." "Not anymore," Samuel replied with a small, knowing smile. Before Eleanor could process this, her phone suddenly sprang to life in her hand, startling her. It was the hospital. With trembling fingers, she answered. "Mrs. Hartwick?" A frantic voice came through. "Your husband, he's gone." 1 minute he was unconscious in bed, the next. The security cameras show him walking out, but he shouldn't have been able to even stand. He attacked a nurse who tried to stop him. "We've called the police, but..." The call cut off as the house groaned again, the walls bulging inward as if something massive were pressing against them. "The family must be complete for the ritual," Amelia said. "All 4 of you, just as there were 4 Blackwoods when they betrayed me." A new sound rose from downstairs, footsteps, slow and uneven, ascending the staircase. But they didn't sound like James's confident stride. These steps were dragging, lurching, as if the person could barely walk. "Daddy's home," the twins said in unison, their black eyes shining with anticipation. The bedroom door creaked open slowly. James stood in the doorway, but he was barely recognizable. His hospital gown was soaked with what looked like dew and soil. His eyes were hollow, his skin waxy and pale except for strange symbols that appeared to have been carved into his forearms. Symbols that matched the ones forming in the frost on the windows. "James?" Eleanor whispered. He looked at her without recognition, then turned to Amelia and dropped to one knee in a gesture of supplication. "Rise," Amelia commanded. "Take your place in the circle." To Eleanor's horror, James obeyed, moving to stand beside the twins. His movements were jerky, puppet-like, as if something else controlled his limbs. "What have you done to him?" Eleanor demanded. "His body is here," Amelia said simply. "That's all we need. The vessel doesn't need to be conscious for what comes next." The house shuddered violently, and a large crack split the ceiling, revealing the night sky above. The stars looked wrong somehow, too bright, too close, arranged in patterns Eleanor had never seen before. The wind that howled through the opening carried whispers, countless voices speaking in that same ancient language. "The veil thins," Amelia announced. "The Blackwoods were foolish to think they could contain me with mere rope and fire. They should have known that hatred and injustice create the strongest anchors for a soul. She turned to Eleanor with an expression almost like pity. You have a choice now, Eleanor Hartwick. Join your family willingly in what comes next or be dragged into it. Either way, your blood will help seal the covenant. What covenant? Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible over the wind and whispers. The return of the true Blackwood line, Amelia replied. Your children carry my blood. They will be the first of a new generation, one that embraces the old powers, the true sight. They will rebuild what was destroyed. The twins stepped forward in unison. Please, Mother, they said, their voices blending into one. It doesn't hurt. We can all be together. Eleanor looked at her children, their familiar faces now masks for something ancient and unknowable. She looked at her husband, empty-eyed and swaying slightly, dirt from what must have been a century-old grave clinging to his hospital gown. And she looked at Amelia, the vengeful spirit who had orchestrated it all. No, Eleanor said, finding a reserve of strength she didn't know she possessed. This ends now. She lunged for the bedside table drawer where she kept a lighter, a habit from her former smoking days. The wood had warped, but she wrenched it open and seized the small metal object. Fire purified this land once, Eleanor said, flicking the lighter to produce a flame. Perhaps it needs to again. Amelia's serene expression faltered for the first time. You wouldn't? Your own children. Aren't my children anymore? Eleanor finished, tears streaming down her face. You've taken them already? Before anyone could react, Eleanor pressed the flame to the curtains, which caught with unnatural speed. The fire spread along the walls as if following a predetermined path, consuming the woody tendrils that had infiltrated the room. Outside, the oak tree shuddered and began to thrash, its branches withdrawing from the windows with a sound like screaming. No! Amelia shrieked, her placid mask falling away completely. Do you know what you've done? The fire formed a ring around them, but instead of closing in, it spread outward, following the hidden roots and branches throughout the house. The walls began to bleed a dark, viscous fluid that ignited on contact with the flames. The house remembers fire, Eleanor said, a grim realization dawning. It's been waiting for this too. The twins stumbled back from the flames, confusion crossing their features. For a moment, Eleanor saw a flicker of her real children in their eyes. Mom? Sophia whispered, her voice her own again. I'm scared. Eleanor tried to reach for her children, but Amelia moved with inhuman speed, positioning herself between them. They're mine now, she hissed, her appearance shifting, the perfect maid dissolving to reveal a charred, broken figure with a neck twisted at an impossible angle. The rope burns around her throat now looked fresh, weeping a black substance that hissed when it hit the floor. You can burn this house 1,000 times. I will always return. I will always find them. The floor beneath them cracked, timber splitting to reveal a yawning darkness below, not the expected first floor of the house, but what looked like an endless pit lined with writhing roots and half-buried bones. The tree's heart, Amelia said, a terrible smile spreading across her ruined face. Where it all began. Where it will begin again, with your children as the seed. She grabbed the twins, who screamed, their real voices filled with terror, as the floor continued to give way beneath them. Outside, sirens wailed and men shouted, powerless to breach the supernatural barrier surrounding the house. The emerging tombstones in the yard had formed a perfect circle around the property, each one now glowing with symbols identical to those carved into James's flesh. The ritual was reaching its climax, and Eleanor had only seconds to decide: let the house and possibly the entire family burn, or descend into the ancient darkness where Amelia Blackwood had been waiting for over a century for her revenge. Time seemed to slow as Eleanor watched her children teetering on the edge of the abyss, Amelia's charred hands gripping their shoulders. The fire raced along the walls, consuming photographs and memories, erasing the life the Hartwicks had built. Through the inferno, Eleanor locked eyes with her twins, seeing past the supernatural darkness to the fear underneath. Her children were still in there, somewhere. Let them choose, Eleanor demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. If they truly belong to you, to the Blackwood line, let them decide their fate. Amelia's ruined face contorted. They've already chosen. No, Eleanor countered. You've manipulated them just as you were manipulated a century ago. You're no better than the family that hanged you. The accusation hit its mark. Amelia's form flickered, momentarily revealing a younger woman. Not the perfect maid, not the vengeful spirit, but the person she had been before hatred consumed her. I was innocent, Amelia whispered, her voice briefly human. They took everything from me. And now you're taking everything from my children. Eleanor pressed, edging closer despite the crumbling floor. Breaking their will just as yours was broken. Is that justice? The house groaned around them, timbers splitting like gunshots. The oak tree outside thrashed in agony as the fire reached its roots, its branches clawing at the sky. "Mom?" Samuel cried out, his eyes flickering between black and their natural blue. "Help us." Eleanor lunged forward across the disintegrating floor, driven by maternal instinct stronger than any supernatural force. "I'm coming." Amelia screamed in rage, her form fully reverting to the twisted, broken creature she had become. She yanked the children backward toward the pit. They will complete the circle. The Blackwood line will rise again. But as she did, something unexpected happened. James, who had been standing immobile throughout the confrontation, suddenly staggered forward. His empty eyes briefly cleared, recognition flashing across his face. "Eleanor?" he mumbled, confused. Then his gaze fell on the twins and something snapped into place. "My children." With strength born of desperation, James tackled Amelia, his larger frame knocking her away from the twins. "Run!" he shouted to his family, his voice his own for the first time since his return. The twins scrambled toward Eleanor, who pulled them into her arms. But James and Amelia were locked in struggle at the edge of the pit, both of them teetering. "James?" Eleanor screamed. He looked up at her, clarity in his eyes despite the supernatural symbols etched into his skin. "I remember now," he said. "The cemetery demolition. I signed without reading. I'm so sorry." "Just come to us," Eleanor begged, reaching out her hand. James tried to disentangle himself from Amelia, but her form had become something less than human and more than spirit. A writhing mass of roots, charred flesh, and hatred that wrapped around him like vines. "If I cannot have the children," Amelia hissed, "I will take the father. Blood for blood." The floor gave way beneath them. James looked at his family one last time. "I love you," he managed to say before he and Amelia plummeted into the darkness below. "Daddy!" The twins screamed in unison, their voices entirely their own now, the supernatural echo gone. Eleanor pulled her children back from the edge, fighting through smoke and tears. The pit began to close itself, roots and earth rushing in to fill the void with unnatural speed. The house was collapsing around them, but the windows, previously sealed by Amelia's power, suddenly shattered outward, creating an escape route. "We have to go now," Eleanor told her children, guiding them toward the nearest window where a police ladder had appeared. "Don't look back." But she herself couldn't help one final glance at the pit as it sealed. For just a moment, she thought she saw James's hand reaching up from the darkness before it was swallowed by earth. Outside, they were rushed away from the house by paramedics and police. From a safe distance, they watched as their home was consumed by flames that burned with unnatural colors, blues and greens mingling with normal orange fire. The oak tree, once majestic and terrifying, collapsed in on itself, its ancient trunk splitting down the middle to reveal a hollow core filled with what looked like centuries of offerings. Small bones, jewelry, scraps of clothing from different eras. "The tree has been feeding for generations," whispered an elderly neighbor who had joined the gathering crowd. Some said it was planted on the spot where the last witch in town was executed. As dawn broke, the fire finally began to die down, leaving nothing but a smoldering foundation. The tombstones that had erupted from the lawn sank back into the earth, leaving no trace. It was as if the land itself was exhaling after holding its breath for a century. The twins, wrapped in shock blankets and clinging to their mother, seemed like themselves again, traumatized, grief-stricken for their father, but free of whatever had been controlling them. "Is it over?" Sophia asked in a small voice. Eleanor wanted to reassure her daughter, but she couldn't bring herself to lie. "I don't know, sweetheart." A police officer approached them cautiously. "Mrs. Hartwick? We need to ask you some questions about what happened here." "Of course," Eleanor replied wearily. "But first I need to know if they found anyone." "My husband." The officer's expression was grim. "No bodies have been recovered yet. With a fire this intense, it may take time." Eleanor nodded, knowing in her heart that they would never find James. He hadn't perished in the fire. He had gone somewhere else entirely, somewhere beyond their reach. 3 months later, the Hartwicks, or what remained of them, had relocated to a small apartment in a neighboring town. The insurance company was still investigating the fire, suspicious of the unusual circumstances reported by first responders. Eleanor had depleted their savings to pay for the twins' therapy sessions, where they worked through what the doctors called shared traumatic delusions, about trees that moved and a maid with black eyes. Late one night, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table reviewing job applications. James's death had not yet been officially declared, freezing most of their assets, when she heard a knock at the door. Cautiously, she approached and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but on the doormat lay a small envelope. Inside was a job offer for a live-in housekeeper position with an elderly couple in a historic home 2 states away. The salary was generous, the benefits excellent. Paper-clipped to the letter was a photograph of the house, a beautiful Victorian with a massive oak tree in the front yard. Eleanor's hands trembled as she noticed what was written on the back of the photograph in elegant script. The perfect mate is hard to find, but once she chooses a family, she never truly leaves. See you soon, Mrs. Hartwick. The children are waiting. From the twins' bedroom came the sound of soft singing, a lullaby in a language no living human should know. Eleanor ran to their room and flung open the door. The twins were sitting up in bed, their eyes open but unseeing, black as midnight. Between them sat a small handmade doll crafted from twigs bound together with what looked like human hair. Its face was a crude drawing on paper, but the smile was unmistakable. The perfect mate had found her way back. And somewhere beneath the ruins of what had once been the Hartwick home, in the darkness of the tree's heart where no light had penetrated for centuries, James Hartwick's body sat propped against gnarled roots, his eyes closed as if in sleep. Carved into the earth wall behind him were hundreds of tally marks, one for each day since he had been taken. Beside his hand lay a small knife fashioned from bone, its edge worn from scraping against stone. And at his feet, a tunnel barely wide enough for a man to crawl through, stretching upward toward the world of the living. The Blackwoods had taken everything from him, but they had underestimated what a father would do to return to his family. Even if it took 100 years. Even if he wasn't entirely human anymore. 6 months had passed since the fire. The Hartwick family's tragedy had faded from local headlines, replaced by newer disasters and scandals. The ruins of their home had been cordoned off, deemed structurally unsafe after investigators discovered what they called unusual subsidence beneath the foundation, a network of cavities and tunnels that no one could explain. Eleanor had moved with the twins to an apartment building 40 miles away, far enough to escape the whispers and stares of their former neighbors, but close enough to maintain some semblance of continuity for the children. Sophia and Samuel attended a new school, where no one knew about the night their father disappeared or the house that burned with impossible colors. But normalcy was a fragile illusion. Every night, Eleanor checked under the twins' beds and in their closets, not for the imaginary monsters that children typically fear, but for signs of twigs bound with hair, for frost patterns on windows, for the subtle scent of lavender and earth that announced Amelia's presence. Most nights she found nothing. But sometimes, just often enough to keep the terror fresh, she would discover a small twig doll tucked into a sock drawer, or hear humming from an empty room, or find dirt on the carpet with no discernible source. "She's coming back, isn't she?" Sophia asked one evening as Eleanor tucked her in. At 10 years old, her eyes held the weariness of someone far older. The twins had recovered from whatever spell Amelia had cast on them, but they weren't the same carefree children they had been. They carried the weight of knowledge that most adults were fortunate enough to live without, the certainty that there were things in the darkness that hungered for them specifically. "We won't let her take you," Eleanor promised, smoothing her daughter's hair. "Not ever again." But even as she spoke the words, she wasn't sure how she could keep that promise. The police had no category for supernatural stalking. The therapist they saw weekly nodded sympathetically about shared trauma responses, but clearly believed their experiences were delusions born from grief. The insurance company had finally paid out for the house, but with the explicit exclusion of damages resulting from unexplained phenomena, which had reduced the settlement considerably. James had been declared legally dead, though no remains had been recovered. The official report listed him as a casualty of the house fire, with a small footnote about his unexplained departure from the hospital. Only the Hartwicks knew the truth, that somewhere in the darkness beneath their former home, something that had once been James might still exist. Eleanor had nightmares about it. Dreams where she would receive phone calls with nothing but breathing on the other end, or find muddy footprints leading to the twins' bedroom door, only to disappear before reaching the threshold. In the worst dreams, she would see James standing at the foot of her bed, his body half transformed into gnarled wood, his eyes pleading as roots slowly consumed what remained of his humanity. She never told the twins about these dreams. They had enough nightmares of their own. Tonight, like every night, Eleanor completed her protective rituals before bed. Salt at the windowsills and thresholds, symbols researched from ancient texts about warding off spirits, and the small silver crosses that a local priest had blessed for them, though she had carefully avoided explaining exactly what they needed protection from. As she finished her rounds and prepared for another night of fitful sleep, her phone vibrated with a text message. Unknown number, have you checked on the children? Eleanor's blood ran cold. She ran to the twins' room, flung open the door, and found them sleeping peacefully. Her shoulders sagged with relief, until she noticed the window was open a crack, the salt line disturbed. Her phone vibrated again. Unknown number, not these children. The others. Attached was a photo of the ruins of their old house, taken recently based on the position of the moon and the partial demolition that had begun last week. But there was something else in the image, small figures moving among the rubble, their forms indistinct but unmistakably child-sized. A third message came through. Unknown number, he's almost reached the surface. But they're waiting for him, just as they waited for me. Eleanor tried calling the number, but an automated message informed her it was disconnected. She considered calling the police, but what would she tell them? That a vengeful spirit was texting her cryptic warnings? That her legally dead husband was tunneling his way out of a supernatural prison? Instead, she did something she had promised herself she would never do. She opened the small lockbox hidden in her closet and removed the hand-drawn map that had arrived mysteriously in their mailbox 3 months ago. A detailed rendering of the tunnel system beneath their former home, with one area circled in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. Scrawled across the bottom in jagged handwriting were the words, "When the third moon of autumn shines full upon the fallen oak, the way will open. Be ready. Bring something of iron. Bring something of salt. Bring something of love." He remembers those. Tonight was the third full moon of autumn. Eleanor looked in on her sleeping children once more, then made a decision she knew might damn them all. She called the one person who might actually believe her. Margaret Thompson, the judge's wife who had whispered about the Crawfords and the Bennets on that fateful night that now seemed a lifetime ago. "I need to know what happened to the other families," Eleanor said when Margaret answered, her voice thick with sleep. There was a long pause before Margaret responded. "It's happening again, isn't it? She's found you." "Yes," Eleanor admitted. "But there's more. I think my husband is trying to come back." Margaret's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. "Where are you?" "No, don't tell me. She might be listening." "Meet me at St. Augustine's Cemetery in 1 hour. Come alone." "I can't leave my children." "Bring them. They're safer with you than apart." "And Eleanor?" "We're something of his. Something James loved. She can mimic many things, but she cannot replicate love. It's how I survived." The line went dead before Eleanor could ask what exactly Margaret had survived. 40 minutes later, Eleanor and the drowsy twins were in their car, heading toward the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. Eleanor wore James's college sweatshirt, which still held a trace of his scent despite countless washings. In her purse were the items mentioned in the strange note: an iron nail from their apartment's renovation, a small container of blessed salt, and James's wedding ring, which had been returned to her by the hospital after his disappearance. The cemetery was shrouded in mist despite the clear night sky, the full moon casting long shadows across ancient headstones. Margaret Thompson waited by the wrought iron gates, her elegant frame wrapped in a heavy coat despite the mild autumn night. "I hoped I'd never see another family go through this," Margaret said by way of greeting. "The Crawfords were the first in our generation. Before them, it was the Wilsons in the 80s and the Pattersons before them." "What happened to them?" Eleanor asked as they walked deeper into the cemetery, the twins staying close, unusually silent. "Different outcomes. The Crawfords lost their son, he became something else. Living but not alive as we understand it. They fled across the country, but it followed them. The father killed himself after the third visitation. The mother and daughter still move every few months, never settling." Eleanor felt the twins' hands tighten in hers. The Bennets were smarter, or luckier. They recognized what was happening sooner, fought back with knowledge rather than fear. Margaret stopped before an ornate family mausoleum, its stone facade covered with symbols similar to those Eleanor had found in her research. "My maiden name was Bennett." She unlocked the mausoleum with a key that seemed to be made of something darker than metal. Inside, instead of the expected burial chamber, was a small room lined with books and artifacts. At the center stood a table with an old map spread across it. The same tunnel system depicted in Eleanor's mysterious diagram, but with significantly more detail. "My great-grandfather mapped these tunnels in 1923, Margaret explained. "They existed long before the modern houses were built over them. Some say they were ancient root systems that hollowed out over centuries. Others believe they were purposefully created by the Blackwoods for their rituals." "What rituals?" Samuel asked, speaking for the first time since they'd left the apartment. Margaret gave the boy a measured look. The Blackwoods didn't worship any god you'd find in a church. They communed with something older. Something that lived in the oak and fed on blood and grief. She turned back to Eleanor. Your husband wasn't the first to be taken, but he might be the first with a chance to return relatively intact. What do you mean? Eleanor asked. The others were sacrifices. Willing or unwilling, they were given to the tree as offerings. But James threw himself into the pit to save his children, a sacrifice of a different sort. That kind of love. It creates a tether that even the oldest dark forces find difficult to sever. Margaret traced a pattern on the map that looked like a spiral centering on what had been the Hartwick property. These tunnels form a labyrinth. At its heart is the oldest part of the oak, its first root, which grew around a much older artifact buried centuries before the first European settlers arrived. What artifact? Sophia asked, her eyes wide. A binding stone. The native tribes used it to trap a spirit that poisoned the land. The Blackwoods found it when they settled here, mistook its power for something they could harness. Margaret's voice grew solemn. Instead, it harnessed them. And when Amelia was hanged, her rage and pain created the perfect vessel for whatever had been bound to that stone. And now it wants my children, Eleanor said, not a question but a statement of terrible fact. It wants to be whole again, Margaret corrected. The twins carry Blackwood blood, yes, but they also carry something else. The potential for the same gifts Amelia had, but uncorrupted. Pure conduits. Then why is she texting me about other children? Eleanor showed Margaret the cryptic messages. The older woman's face drained of color. The others, she whispered. Of course. Every family that lived in that house that confronted Amelia, not all of them escaped with all their children. Some were taken, converted, transformed. Into what? Eleanor demanded. Guardians, Margaret said grimly. Sentinels to ensure that what's trapped stays trapped. But if James is indeed finding his way out, they'll try to stop him, Eleanor finished the thought. Or worse, use him to free themselves. Margaret nodded gravely. And if they succeed, Amelia won't need your twins anymore. She'll have an army of corrupted children spanning a century of victims. Outside the mausoleum, the mist had thickened, swirling in patterns too deliberate to be natural. Through the small stained glass window, Eleanor could see dark shapes moving within the fog, small figures darting between headstones, drawing ever closer. We need to go to the house, Eleanor said, sudden clarity cutting through her fear. Tonight, before they reach James. That's suicide, Margaret protested. You can't fight her on ground that's been soaking in her power for generations. We're not going to fight, Sophia said quietly, an odd resonance in her voice that sent chills down Eleanor's spine. We're going to finish what started 100 years ago. Samuel nodded in agreement, his eyes momentarily flashing with a darkness that wasn't quite Amelia's influence, but something older, something that had been sleeping in the Blackwood bloodline for generations. The children are right, came a new voice from the mausoleum entrance. Eleanor whirled to find a man standing there, elderly, stooped, but with eyes sharp as flint. He leaned on a cane carved with symbols matching those on the mausoleum walls. Bennett? Margaret greeted him with obvious surprise. I thought you were in Europe. I was. Until every ward and warning I've placed over the years activated simultaneously 3 nights ago. The old man limped into the chamber, his gaze fixed on the twins. So these are the last of the line. The true line. Who are you? Eleanor demanded, pulling her children closer. Harrison Bennett. Margaret's uncle, though there are enough generations between us to make the relationship complicated. He tapped the map with his cane. I've spent 70 years studying the Blackwood curse, mapping its manifestations, tracking its hunger across decades. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that tonight is not just about your husband finding his way back. Then what is it about? Eleanor asked. Harrison's weathered face was grim. It's about whether what comes back is still your husband at all. The mist outside the mausoleum had thickened into an impenetrable wall, the small figures now visible only as darker smudges within the swirling white. The temperature had dropped precipitously, their breath fogging in the air. We're trapped, Margaret observed, her voice remarkably calm for someone facing supernatural siege. Not trapped, Harrison corrected, tapping his cane against the stone floor. Protected for the moment. This mausoleum was built with specific deterrence. He turned to Eleanor. But we cannot stay here indefinitely. The Bennett safeguards were designed for containment, not confrontation. Eleanor studied the old man's face, noting the deep lines that spoke of decades of vigilance. You've been fighting this your whole life, haven't you? Fighting, studying, preparing, Harrison confirmed. My sister, Margaret's grandmother, was taken by the Blackwood entity in 1949. She returned 3 days later, seemingly unharmed but changed. By the time the family realized what had happened, 2 more children were dead, and the cycle had begun anew. Did you kill her? Samuel asked bluntly, his young voice incongruous with the grim question. Harrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, an old pain expertly contained. No, child. She killed herself when she briefly regained control. Her final act of love was to deny the entity its vessel. He lifted his cane, revealing a silver handle worn smooth by decades of handling. This was hers. Iron, silver, and wood from the original Blackwood property, before it was corrupted. The tree, Sophia whispered, her small hand reaching out toward the cane but not quite touching it. It wasn't always evil, was it? No, Harrison said, looking at the girl with renewed interest. The oak was once a sentinel, a guardian. The native tribes considered it sacred, a living lock on the darkness beneath. But locks can be picked, barriers corrupted. When Amelia was hanged from its branches, Eleanor realized, her death corrupted the guardian. Precisely, Harrison nodded approvingly. Innocent blood spilled in hatred and fear, there is no more potent catalyst for perverting protective magic into something malevolent. The mausoleum trembled suddenly, dust raining down from the ceiling as something heavy crashed against the outer wall. The stained glass window cracked but held. They're testing the boundaries, Margaret said, moving to a cabinet against the wall and extracting several cloth-wrapped bundles. We need to move quickly if we're going to reach the Hartwick property tonight. Harrison's gaze hadn't left the twins. The children are the key. They contain both the poison and the antidote in their blood. What do you mean? Eleanor demanded. The Blackwood gift was never meant to be a curse, the old man explained. It was a responsibility, a lineage of guardians for the binding stone. But when the settlers arrived, they feared what they didn't understand, twisted the narrative to fit their superstitions. The guardians became witches, the protectors became threats. Another crash against the wall, harder this time. A thin crack appeared in the stone. Harrison, Margaret warned, her voice tense. Your children are the last uncorrupted vessels of the original Blackwood line, Harrison continued urgently. They could restore the balance, repair what was broken when Amelia was murdered, but only if they choose it freely. Their children, Eleanor protested. They can't possibly understand. We understand more than you think, Mom, Samuel interrupted, his voice steady despite the supernatural chaos building outside. We've been dreaming about it since that night. Sophia nodded in agreement. We see the tree as it used to be. We see the stone beneath it. And we see the children, the lost ones, trapped between. James too, Samuel added. He's been sending us messages. Messages? Eleanor felt her heart constrict. Why didn't you tell me? We were afraid, Sophia admitted, her eyes welling with tears. Afraid it was a trick, that it wasn't really Dad. Harrison exchanged a significant look with Margaret. They have the sight. Untrained but natural. Is it really their father contacting them? Eleanor asked, dreading the answer. Harrison's expression grew somber. Possibly. But the entity is cunning. It has centuries of experience manipulating human connection, exploiting love and grief. We cannot trust any communication from below without verification. Margaret had finished distributing the contents of the bundles. Small packets of herbs, vials of clear liquid, and what looked like rough stone amulets carved with symbols. These won't hold them back forever, but they should provide some protection. Everyone take one. As Eleanor fastened an amulet around her neck, she felt a subtle warmth spread through her chest. The twins did the same, Samuel visibly relaxing as his touched his skin. The Bennett family has been preparing for generations, Harrison explained. Margaret's branch maintained the records and warning systems. Mine focused on developing countermeasures. And yet you've never been able to destroy it, Eleanor observed. Destroy, no, Harrison acknowledged. But contain, restrict, weaken, yes. The entity has not been able to expand beyond the original Blackwood territory despite numerous attempts. That is not insignificant. A third impact against the mausoleum wall, powerful enough to dislodge small fragments of stone. The crack widened ominously. We need a plan, Eleanor insisted, pulling her children close. You said we need to go to the house tonight. How do we get past them? She gestured toward the mist-shrouded figures outside. We use what they want against them, Harrison said, his eyes glinting with the determination of a man who had spent a lifetime preparing for this moment. They want the children, so we give them exactly that. Before Eleanor could protest, he continued, not actually, of course, but the appearance. He looked to Margaret. Do you still have it? She nodded grimly and moved to the back of the chamber, pressing a hidden panel in the stone wall. A compartment slid open, revealing a small wooden box bound with iron bands. From it, she removed what looked like two small, perfectly clear crystals. Bloodstones, Harrison explained as Margaret handed them to the twins. They absorb and reflect essence. If the children donate a single drop of blood each, the stones will create a convincing spiritual signature, enough to distract the sentinels while we take an alternate route. Eleanor balked at the suggestion. You want to use my children as bait? No, Harrison corrected firmly. I want to use an echo of them. The real children will be with us, protected by the Bennett safeguards and your presence. Another impact harder than before. The crack in the wall was now large enough to see through to the swirling mist outside. We don't have time to debate, Margaret warned. It's okay, Mom, Samuel said, taking one of the clear stones. We want to help Dad. He would do it for us, Sophia added, her small chin set in determination. Eleanor looked at her children, too young to bear such burdens, yet somehow finding the strength to face them. How do we do this? Harrison produced a small silver pin from his pocket. One drop each directly onto the stone, then wrapped them in these. He handed them squares of black cloth embroidered with silver symbols. With only slight hesitation, the twins pricked their fingers and watched as a single drop of blood fell onto each crystal. The effect was immediate and startling. The clear stones turned a deep, pulsing red, emitting a subtle glow that illuminated their small faces from below. Quickly now, wrap them, Harrison instructed. Once wrapped, Margaret took the bundles and moved to a small door at the rear of the mausoleum that Eleanor hadn't noticed before. This leads to the old groundskeeper's tunnel, she explained. I'll place these at the far end of the cemetery. It should draw them away long enough for us to reach the east gate. Be careful, Harrison warned. Margaret's smile was thin but determined. I've been careful for 50 years, Uncle. It hasn't kept us safe. Perhaps it's time for boldness. With that, she slipped through the door with the bloodstones, leaving the others in tense silence. While they waited, Harrison extracted a worn journal from an inner pocket of his coat and opened it to a carefully marked page. The tunnels beneath your property follow this configuration, he explained, showing Eleanor a complex diagram. There are 9 possible emergence points where the entity has broken through to the surface over the decades. Based on the lunar cycle and the timing of the messages, I believe your husband will attempt to surface here. He pointed to a spot marked with a small X. That's the garden shed, Eleanor realized. It was the only original structure left standing after we renovated. Precisely, Harrison nodded. The entity cannot manifest fully in spaces that have been substantially altered from their original state. The shed provided a perfect anchor point. Is that why Amelia worked so hard to make our house perfect? Eleanor asked. Was she preparing it all along? Conditioning it, Harrison confirmed. Removing modern influences, reinstating older patterns. Houses have memories, Mrs. Hartwick. She was helping your home remember what it used to be, what it could be again. The mausoleum door suddenly burst open, admitting a gust of frigid air, and Margaret, her face flushed with exertion but triumphant. It worked, she gasped. They've moved toward the north side. We have minutes at most before they realize the deception. Harrison was already moving, ushering them toward the door. Stay close. Touch nothing but the ground. If the mist comes near you, don't breathe. They emerged into the cemetery, now eerily quiet. The fog had indeed retreated toward the northern section, leaving their path to the east gate relatively clear. They moved quickly between headstones, the twins between the adults, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth. Why haven't they attacked the town? Eleanor whispered as they hurried along. If this entity is so powerful, why contain itself to specific families? It's not about power, Harrison replied softly. It's about quality. The entity feeds on specific spiritual signatures, bloodlines with particular attributes. The Blackwoods were chosen because they already possessed sensitivity to the veil between worlds. That sensitivity has passed down through certain branches, manifesting in different ways. Like our nightmares, Sophia murmured. And the way we sometimes hear each other's thoughts, Samuel added. Harrison nodded gravely. Twins often manifest these gifts more strongly. It's why you were particularly valuable to the entity. They had nearly reached the gate when a change in the air made Harrison freeze, his hand raised in warning. The mist, which had been retreating northward, suddenly shifted direction, flowing back toward them with unnatural speed and purpose. "They've discovered the deception," he warned. "Run." They sprinted for the gate, but the mist moved faster, cutting off their escape route in a solid wall of swirling white. Within it, Eleanor could now clearly see the shapes of children, dozens of them from different eras based on their clothing, all with the same hollow-eyed stare and reaching hands. "The lost ones," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't look at them," Harrison commanded. "They want your pity, your connection. It's how they draw you in." The children in the mist began to call out in a horrifying chorus of young voices spanning decades. "Help us. Join us. He's waiting for you. Father needs you." At the last phrase, Eleanor felt the twins stiffen on either side of her. "It's not Dad," she told them firmly. "Remember what Harrison said, it's a trick." But the mist children had already changed tactics, their voices now mimicking James with uncanny accuracy. "Sophia, Samuel, help me find my way back. I'm lost without you. Just reach out and we can be together again." Eleanor felt her heart breaking at the sound of her husband's voice, knowing how deeply it must be affecting her children. The mist pressed closer, the temperature dropping until their breath froze in the air before them. "We need another way out," Margaret said urgently, scanning the cemetery. Harrison's expression was grim as he reached into his coat and withdrew a small glass vial filled with dark liquid. "There's one option, but it's dangerous. This is essence of the binding. Stone, the last sample recovered before the Blackwood property was built over. It will create a temporary pathway, but it will also alert the entity to our intentions." "Do we have a choice?" Eleanor asked. "There's always a choice," Harrison replied, his eyes solemn. "But rarely a good one in these circumstances." Without waiting for further discussion, he unstoppered the vial and poured its contents onto the ground in a perfect circle around them. The liquid seemed to sink into the earth with unnatural speed, and for a moment nothing happened. Then the ground beneath them began to glow with a soft amber light, and the mist recoiled as if burned. The children's shapes writhed in apparent pain, their voices transforming from plaintive calls to hisses of anger. "Now we run," Harrison instructed. "The pathway will hold only for moments." They dashed between the headstones again, following the amber glow that seemed to be creating a narrow corridor through the mist. Behind them, the lost children's anger grew, the mist churning violently as they pursued. But ahead, the cemetery gate was clear. They burst through it onto the dark street beyond, where Harrison's vintage Volvo waited, its engine already running. "Who?" Eleanor began. "I have a few allies left," Harrison explained tersely as he ushered them into the vehicle. "Now we have approximately 20 minutes before the entity fully awakens to our presence. We must reach the Hartwick property before then." As they pulled away from the cemetery, Eleanor looked back to see the mist gathered at the gates, unable to pass but watching with patient malevolence. Within it, she glimpsed a familiar silhouette, tall, straight-backed, perfect posture. Amelia had joined her sentinels, and she was smiling. The car sped through the night, headlights carving a path through the darkness as rain began to fall in earnest. Eleanor sat in the back seat beside Marcus, their shoulders touching as the vehicle swayed around corners. In the front passenger seat, Dr. Bennett clutched his leather satchel to his chest, his knuckles white with tension. "How much do you know?" Harrison asked, eyes never leaving the road as the windshield wipers fought against the downpour. Eleanor exchanged glances with Marcus before answering. "We know the Hartwicks were conducting some kind of ritual decades ago. We know they were trying to access something, power, knowledge, through what they called the Veil. And we know whatever they awakened has been consuming people ever since." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Not consuming, collecting. There's a difference. Collecting for what purpose?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Vessels," Harrison replied, taking a sharp turn onto a narrow road flanked by ancient oaks. "The entity, the one the Hartwicks called Moribus in their journals, exists partially outside our reality. It needs human vessels to fully manifest in our world." Dr. Bennett finally spoke, his voice barely audible above the rain. "The fog we've been seeing, it's not just a manifestation. It's a threshold state, neither fully here nor there." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "And Amelia? What happened to her?" "She's become a conduit," Harrison said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Not quite possessed, not quite consumed. The perfect vessel, someone who invited it in willingly. The implications hit Eleanor like a physical blow. The journal entries, she found them. She's been searching for this, hasn't she? Continuing what her ancestors started. Yes, Harrison confirmed. The Hartwick bloodline has always been susceptible to Moribus's influence. They believe they're accessing ancient wisdom, power beyond human understanding. They don't realize they're simply being prepared. For what? Marcus asked. For the gathering, Dr. Bennett interjected, opening his satchel and pulling out a worn leather-bound book. Every 77 years, when certain celestial alignments occur, the veil thins. The Hartwicks thought they were the masters of this cycle, but they were merely pawns. Tonight marks the culmination of the current cycle. Eleanor's mind raced. That's why everything has been accelerating. The disappearances, the fog, the visions. The preparations are nearly complete, Harrison said grimly. Moribus has been gathering vessels through Amelia and the others it has claimed. Tonight, if the final ritual is completed at the Hartwick property, those vessels will be sacrificed to create a permanent anchor in our reality. The car crested a hill, and through the curtain of rain, Eleanor caught her first glimpse of the Hartwick estate in the distance. A looming Victorian mansion silhouetted against the storm-dark sky. Lightning flashed, illuminating the property for a brief moment. Figures moved across the grounds, dozens of them, all converging on the house with the eerie synchronicity of a single organism. My God, Marcus whispered. How many people has it taken? Too many, Harrison answered, his voice heavy with guilt. I was Amelia's colleague at the university. I should have recognized the signs sooner. By the time I understood what was happening, most of the department had already been influenced. But you have a plan, Eleanor stated, more a desperate hope than a question. Harrison nodded. The ritual requires the presence of a Hartwick descendant with untainted blood, someone who can serve as the final vessel, the anchor. Without that, the gateway cannot be permanently established. And who would that be? Marcus asked. Harrison's eyes met Eleanor's in the rearview mirror. According to the genealogical records I've traced, that would be you, Eleanor. Your grandmother was Clara Hartwick's sister. You're the last untainted blood relative. The revelation struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Suddenly, the dreams, the strange familiarity of the fog, the way she had been drawn into this nightmare from the beginning, it all made a terrible kind of sense. That's why Amelia has been watching me, she whispered. That's why I was led to find those documents. Not led, Dr. Bennett corrected. Lured. You were being prepared just as the others were. But something interfered. Your resistance, perhaps, or something in your bloodline that makes you different. The car slowed as they approached a service road that would take them to the back of the property. Harrison killed the headlights and pulled to the side of the road. We have only one chance, he said, turning to face them. The ritual must be interrupted before midnight, when the alignment reaches its peak. Dr. Bennett has prepared a counter-ritual from texts I recovered from the university archives. And what exactly does this counter-ritual entail? Marcus asked, suspicion evident in his voice. Harrison and Dr. Bennett exchanged a look that sent a fresh wave of dread through Eleanor. It requires the blood of a Hartwick, Dr. Bennett admitted, but freely given, not taken. A willing sacrifice of the very thing Moribus covets most. Eleanor felt the weight of their gazes. You need my blood. Not your life, Harrison clarified quickly. Just your blood, freely offered to seal the veil rather than open it. It inverts the ritual's intent. Marcus put a protective hand on Eleanor's arm. And we're just supposed to trust you? How do we know you're not working for this thing? Harrison pulled up his sleeve, revealing a forearm covered in ritual scars, dozens of thin, precise lines. Because I've been fighting it for years. Ever since I discovered what happened to my sister. Your sister? Eleanor asked. Jane Wilcox, Harrison said, the name landing like a stone. She was among the first to disappear 6 months ago. By the time I understood what was happening, she was already gone, absorbed into the fog. That's why I've been tracking the patterns, why I've been watching the cemetery. I knew eventually it would lead me to someone who could help end this. Thunder crashed overhead as they sat in silence, the weight of what lay ahead settling over them. Through the rain-streaked windows, Eleanor could see the fog beginning to creep along the ground toward their vehicle. We're out of time, Dr. Bennett warned, gathering his materials. It sensed us. We need to move now. Harrison reached into the glove compartment and removed an antique silver dagger with strange symbols etched into the blade. This has been in the Hartwick family for generations. It's meant to open the veil, but we can use it to seal it instead. He offered it to Eleanor, handle first. The choice must be yours, freely made. I can't guarantee we'll all survive this, but if we don't try, everyone in this town will become vessels for something that should never exist in our world. Eleanor looked at the blade, then at Marcus, whose eyes reflected her own fear but also fierce determination. Finally, she reached out and took the dagger, feeling its surprising warmth against her palm. "Let's finish this," she said and stepped out into the rain. Rain pelted Eleanor's face as she stepped from the car, the silver dagger concealed inside her jacket. The Hartwick mansion loomed before them, its Victorian architecture transformed into something grotesque by the storm's fury. Lightning branched across the sky, briefly illuminating the figures moving across the grounds, people walking with the same unnatural synchronicity, their faces blank, eyes reflecting nothing. "Stay low," Harrison whispered, leading them toward a narrow servant's path that curved around the edge of the property. "The fog is thinner here. Moribus's influence doesn't extend as strongly to the periphery." Dr. Bennett clutched his satchel, whispering incantations under his breath that seemed to push back the creeping tendrils of mist attempting to encircle their ankles. Marcus stayed close to Eleanor, a reassuring presence at her back. "What exactly are we looking for?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible above the storm. "The ritual will be centered in the conservatory," Harrison explained. It was built directly above the original foundation stones of the property, supposedly marking a natural weak point in the vale. They reached a crumbling stone wall covered in ivy, and Harrison pressed a section that gave way with a soft click. A narrow doorway appeared, revealing a passageway into what must have been part of the original structure. "Servants' entrance," Harrison explained. The Hartwicks had many secrets they wanted to keep from prying eyes. The passage was damp and smelled of earth and decay. Eleanor fought back claustrophobia as they moved deeper into the narrow corridor, lit only by the small flashlight Harrison had produced. The walls seemed to press inward, and several times she could have sworn she heard whispers just beyond the range of comprehension. "The house itself is saturated with the entity's influence," Dr. Bennett warned. "Don't trust anything you see or hear." After what felt like an eternity of careful movement through the cramped passage, they reached a wooden door. Harrison paused, pressing his ear against it before slowly turning the ancient handle. "We're beneath the main hall," he whispered. "From here we can access the conservatory through the library. But first we need to prepare." Dr. Bennett opened his satchel and removed several small vials of dark liquid, along with bundles of dried herbs. "Protection," he explained, dabbing the mixture onto each of their foreheads. "It won't hide us completely, but it may confuse the sentinels long enough for us to reach the center." The liquid felt ice-cold against Eleanor's skin, spreading a numbing sensation across her face. For a moment, her vision blurred, then sharpened with startling clarity. The others' faces appeared haloed in faint blue light, and the walls around them seemed to pulse with dark veins. "What is this?" she whispered, disturbed by her altered perception. "You're seeing the currents," Dr. Bennett explained. "The flows of energy. Your Hartwick blood makes you more sensitive to it. Use it, watch for concentrations of darkness. That's where the sentinels will be strongest." Harrison eased the door open. Beyond lay a dusty corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women, generations of Hartwicks, Eleanor realized with a chill. Their eyes seemed to follow her movement, and in her enhanced vision, dark tendrils connected each painting like a spiderweb of malevolence. They moved quietly down the hall, freezing at the sound of footsteps above. Dust filtered down from the ceiling as multiple people moved in unison overhead. "More vessels," Harrison murmured, being called to witness the ritual. The library door stood partially open at the end of the hallway. As they approached, Eleanor felt a strange pull, not toward the conservatory where the ritual would take place, but toward a small side room off the main corridor. "Wait," she whispered, following the sensation. "There's something." "Eleanor, we don't have time," Marcus warned, but she was already pushing open the door to what appeared to be a small study. Inside, a writing desk sat beneath a window that flashed with lightning. On it lay an open journal, its pages yellowed with age. And beside it, inexplicably, sat the ceramic figurine of a dancer that Eleanor recognized with a jolt, identical to one that had sat on her grandmother's mantle throughout her childhood. "This was hers," Eleanor breathed, picking up the figurine. "My grandmother's." "The connection is stronger than I thought," Dr. Bennett said, glancing nervously at the door. "Moribus is drawing on your shared memories, using them to strengthen the lure." Eleanor opened the journal, finding entries in her grandmother's handwriting. Entries that spoke of escaping, of breaking away from the family burden, of protecting future generations from the hunger that never dies. She knew, Eleanor realized. She left to protect her children, to protect my mother and me. A crash from above startled them. The floor beneath their feet trembled as a low, resonant hum began to vibrate through the house. The ritual is beginning, Harrison said urgently. We need to move. Now. As they slipped into the library, Eleanor tucked the small figurine into her pocket. A talisman, a connection to the grandmother who had tried to break the cycle. The library was vast, shelves stretching to the ceiling and filled with ancient tomes. At its center stood a spiral staircase leading to an upper gallery. And at the far end, glass doors revealed the conservatory beyond. Even from this distance, Eleanor could see the gathering inside. Figures arranged in concentric circles around a central dais where Amelia stood, arms raised, her voice carrying a chant that seemed to make the air itself shudder. Behind her loomed something that defied description. A tear in reality shaped like a doorway, its edges roiling with the same mist that had haunted Eleanor's nightmares. "Dear God," Marcus whispered. "What is that?" "The veil," Dr. Bennett replied, his face ashen. "It's already thinning." Harrison pulled them behind a row of bookshelves as two blank-faced sentinels walked past, heading toward the conservatory. "We need to disrupt the inner circle. The ritual requires 13 primary vessels arranged around Amelia. If we can break that formation, it will buy us time to perform the counter-ritual." "And how exactly do we get past all those people?" Marcus asked. Dr. Bennett removed a small clay pot from his satchel. "Distraction," he said grimly. "When I throw this, chaos will follow. It will temporarily disorient the sentinels, but it will also alert moribus to our presence. Once I use this, we'll have minutes at most." Eleanor clutched the silver dagger through her jacket. "What do I need to do?" "Reach the center," Harrison said. "When the moment comes, you'll need to offer your blood not to open the doorway but to seal it. The words of the counter-ritual are simple, an inversion of their chant. You'll know them when you hear them." Eleanor wanted to ask how she would know, but the certainty in Harrison's eyes stopped her. Something in her blood would recognize the words, just as something in her blood had drawn her into this nightmare. Dr. Bennett handed her a small vial of clear liquid. "Drink this before you approach the center. It will temporarily amplify your Hartwick blood, make you a stronger conduit than Amelia. Moribus will be drawn to you instead of her." "You're using me as bait," Eleanor realized. "Yes," Harrison admitted without apology. "It's the only way to get you close enough." A sudden silence fell over the house, so complete that it felt like a physical pressure against their ears. Then Amelia's voice rang out, no longer chanting but speaking clear, commanding words. "Bring forth the vessel that bears the purest blood. The final descendant whose sacrifice will complete the circle." The sentinels in the conservatory turned as one, their blank faces somehow expectant. From the center of the gathering, Amelia's eyes swept the room, and then locked directly on the bookshelf behind which they hid. A smile of terrible triumph spread across her face. "There you are, cousin," she called, her voice carrying an unnatural resonance. "We've been waiting for you." The sentinels began to move toward the library, their movements jerky yet purposeful. Dr. Bennett looked to Harrison, who nodded grimly. "Now," Harrison ordered. Dr. Bennett hurled the clay pot toward the center of the library. It shattered against the floor, releasing a cloud of shimmering dust that expanded with unnatural speed. The effect was immediate. The approaching sentinels faltered, their coordinated movements dissolving into confusion. "Run!" Harrison shouted, pushing Eleanor toward the conservatory doors. "We'll hold them off." Eleanor and Marcus sprinted across the library as Harrison and Dr. Bennett positioned themselves to intercept the disoriented sentinels. The shimmering dust made the air thick, difficult to breathe, but it created the window they needed. They reached the glass doors of the conservatory just as a terrible scream echoed through the library. Eleanor looked back to see Dr. Bennett surrounded by sentinels, their hands clawing at him as he continued to chant words of protection. Harrison fought his way toward him, but there were too many. "We can't help them now," Marcus said, gripping her arm. "This is our only chance." With a final look at their companions fighting a losing battle, Eleanor uncorked the vial Dr. Bennett had given her and drank its contents in one swallow. It burned like fire down her throat, spreading instant heat through her limbs. Her vision swam, the world becoming oversaturated with color and shadow. Marcus pushed open the conservatory doors, and together they stepped into the ritual chamber where Amelia awaited, the tear in reality pulsing behind her like a living wound in the air itself. "Welcome home, Eleanor," Amelia said, her voice no longer entirely her own. "We've saved your place in the circle." Behind her, through the shimmering doorway, something vast and incomprehensible began to move toward the threshold. The conservatory air felt impossibly dense, charged with energy that made Eleanor's skin prickle and the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. Glass walls and ceiling revealed the storm raging outside, lightning illuminating the room in stark, erratic flashes that cast everything in momentary harsh relief before plunging back into shadow. 13 figures stood in perfect formation around a central dais where Amelia waited, her body unnaturally still yet somehow vibrating with contained power. Behind her, the tear in reality pulsed like a heartbeat, widening with each throb to reveal glimpses of something that Eleanor's mind struggled to comprehend. Geometries that shouldn't exist, depths that seemed to fold in on themselves. "You've come to take your rightful place," Amelia said, her voice layered with others, dozens, perhaps hundreds of voices speaking in unison through her. The final Hartwick, the untainted vessel. Eleanor felt Marcus tense beside her, ready to fight despite the impossible odds. She placed a steadying hand on his arm. "I've come to end this," Eleanor replied, surprised by the strength in her voice. Dr. Bennett's concoction burned through her veins, heightening her senses until she could see dark tendrils connecting each sentinel to Amelia, and through her to the widening tier. Amelia's smile was terrible to behold. "You cannot end what has always been. Moribus existed before your bloodline, before this land, before the concept of time as you understand it. We merely opened the door that was long ago closed. By my ancestors," Eleanor said, taking a step forward. "They closed it for a reason. Out of fear," Amelia hissed. "Out of weakness. They lacked the vision to embrace what Moribus offered." "And what exactly is that offer?" Marcus asked, playing for time as Eleanor subtly reached for the silver dagger concealed in her jacket. "Transcendence," Amelia replied, spreading her arms. The sleeves of her black gown fell back, revealing skin etched with the same ritual scars Harrison had shown them. Freedom from the prison of individual consciousness. Union with something greater. Behind her, the tear widened further, and Eleanor caught a glimpse of what waited beyond. A vast, shifting presence composed of countless absorbed consciousnesses, all somehow retaining a fragment of their original identity while forming parts of the greater whole. Among them, she recognized faces, the missing townspeople, academics from the university, and with a jolt of horror, she saw Dr. Bennett, his expression frozen in a silent scream. "You don't offer transcendence," Eleanor said, the truth suddenly clear. "You offer consumption." Amelia's face twisted with anger. "You understand nothing. The ritual is nearly complete. Moribus comes whether you offer yourself willingly or not." The 13 sentinels began to sway in unison, a low chant building from their throats. The sound resonated with the pulsing tear, each syllable widening the breach between worlds. "Now, Marcus," Eleanor whispered. With practiced precision that spoke of his military past, Marcus hurled something toward the farthest edge of the circle, a small metallic object that Eleanor hadn't even seen him prepare. It clattered across the floor, drawing the attention of several sentinels just as it erupted in a blinding flash and deafening bang. The disruption broke the sentinels' concentration. Their chant faltered, and several stumbled from their positions. The tear in reality shuddered, momentarily contracting. Amelia screamed in fury, a sound no human throat should have been able to produce. "Seize them." Eleanor used the moment of chaos to sprint toward the dais, the silver dagger now clutched openly in her hand. Marcus moved in the opposite direction, creating a second disruption by overturning a table of ritual implements. 3 sentinels converged on Eleanor, their movements jerky but determined. She ducked under the grasp of the first, slashed at the reaching hands of the second with her dagger, and used the momentum to slide past the third. Blood from the cut sentinel splattered across the conservatory floor, normal human blood, Eleanor noted with a pang of guilt. These were people, trapped and used by something beyond their understanding. She reached the base of the dais as Amelia descended toward her, no longer bothering with the pretense of normal human movement. Her body seemed to float inches above the ground, her hair writhing like serpents around her face. "You cannot stop what has already begun," Amelia said, her voice resonating at a frequency that made Eleanor's teeth ache. "The alignment peaks in moments. The door will fully open." Behind her, the tear widened dramatically, and a cold wind howled from the other side, carrying with it whispers in 1,000 voices. Through the gap, something massive was taking shape, gathering itself to cross the threshold. "Eleanor," Marcus shouted from across the room, fighting off 2 sentinels. "Whatever you're going to do, do it now." The words of the counter-ritual came to Eleanor then, rising from some ancestral memory buried in her blood. They weren't words so much as concepts, ideas that formed themselves into sounds her mouth could produce. She raised the silver dagger and in one swift motion, drew its edge across her palm. Blood welled immediately, bright crimson against her skin. By blood freely given, not taken, she began, the ancient words flowing from her lips as if she had always known them. By choice, not coercion. By sacrifice made in protection, not domination. Amelia lunged toward her with inhuman speed, but something repelled her, a shimmering barrier that formed around Eleanor as the ritual words took effect. Amelia's body contorted in fury as she clawed at the invisible shield. "You cannot close what has been opened," she screamed, her face transforming, features shifting between her own and something older, more primal. "I seal what my ancestors unsealed," Eleanor continued, pressing her bleeding palm against the silver dagger's blade, coating it with her blood. "I reclaim what was surrendered. I restore what was broken." The conservatory began to shake. Glass panels cracked in spiderwebs across the ceiling. The sentinels fell to their knees, clutching their heads as if in terrible pain. The tear in reality pulsed violently, and through it, Eleanor saw the entity called Moribus fully for the first time, not a singular being but a collective, a hive of consciousness with one unifying hunger. It pushed against the boundary between worlds, sensing the threat to its crossing. In that moment, Harrison burst through the conservatory doors, bloodied but alive. He staggered toward Eleanor, clutching a leather-bound book. "The final words," he shouted above the howling wind. "You need the final invocation." He tossed the book toward her. It slid across the floor, coming to rest at the base of the dais. Eleanor snatched it up, finding it open to a page covered in symbols that rearranged themselves before her eyes, forming words she could understand. "With this blade forged from the stars," she read, raising the blood-coated dagger, "I sever the tie between worlds." She plunged the dagger toward the center of the tear. Amelia made one final, desperate lunge, breaking through the weakening barrier around Eleanor. Her hands closed around Eleanor's throat with supernatural strength. "If I die, you die with me," Amelia hissed, her face inches from Eleanor's. "Moribus will have at least one Hartwick this night." Eleanor's vision began to darken as Amelia's grip tightened. The dagger was still in her hand, inches from completing the ritual, but her strength was fading. Suddenly Marcus was there. He grabbed Amelia from behind, breaking her concentration enough for her grip to loosen. "Finish it," he shouted. With her remaining strength, Eleanor thrust the dagger forward, into the heart of the tear. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The tear convulsed, edges curling inward like burning paper. A scream erupted from it, not a single voice but thousands, unified in rage and desperation. The entity pushed against the closing passage with all its considerable might, appendages of shadow and mist grasping for purchase in our reality. Amelia's body arched backward, her connection to Moribus pulling her toward the collapsing tear. "No!" she shrieked, reaching for Eleanor with desperate hands. "You've doomed us all. Without Moribus, there is only the void." Marcus pulled Eleanor back as the tear began to implode, creating a vacuum that pulled everything loose toward it. Ritual objects, shattered glass, and fragments of broken furniture swirled in a vortex around the collapsing portal. Amelia fought against the pull, but the connection between her and the entity was too strong. Her feet left the ground as she was drawn inexorably toward the tear. "Eleanor," she screamed, momentarily sounding like herself again, afraid, human. "Help me." For a heartbeat, Eleanor nearly reached for her cousin's outstretched hand. But Harrison's warning voice cut through the chaos. "Don't. She's still connected, she'll pull you in too." The tear contracted to a pinpoint of brilliant light, pulling Amelia with it. In the final moment before she disappeared, Eleanor caught a glimpse of her cousin's face, clear of the entity's influence, showing only human terror and, perhaps, a flicker of relief. Then the tear sealed completely with a thunderclap that shattered every remaining pane of glass in the conservatory. A shockwave knocked everyone to the floor, and darkness fell as the power throughout the mansion failed. In the sudden silence that followed, Eleanor could hear only the sound of rain and the labored breathing of survivors around her. The pressure that had built in her mind throughout the ordeal lifted, leaving behind a clarity that felt almost painful in its intensity. Marcus helped her to her feet, his hands steady despite everything they'd witnessed. "Is it over?" he asked. Eleanor looked to where the tear had been. Nothing remained, no trace of the portal, no sign of Amelia or Moribus. The sentinels lay unconscious around the room, looking merely human now, victims rather than threats. Harrison limped toward them, clutching his side where blood seeped through his shirt. It's sealed, he confirmed, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Permanently if the ritual worked as intended. And Dr. Bennett? Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer from what she'd glimpsed through the tear. Harrison shook his head grimly. He bought us the time we needed. Without him, we wouldn't have made it this far. Eleanor looked down at her bleeding palm, at the silver dagger still clutched in her other hand. What happens to them? She asked, gesturing to the unconscious sentinels. They'll wake with no memory of what happened, Harrison explained. A mercy all things considered. Outside, the storm was beginning to subside, the rain softening to a gentle patter against the broken glass roof. First light touched the eastern horizon, casting long shadows through the devastated conservatory. It's been in my family all this time, Eleanor said quietly. This burden, this responsibility. And you fulfilled it, Harrison told her. Your grandmother would be proud. She tried to break away to protect future generations, but some ties can't be severed completely. It took someone of the bloodline to end what the bloodline began. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the weight of generations of Hartwicks, some who had fought against Moribus, others who had welcomed it. The duality of her heritage. We should go, Marcus said gently, looking around at the destruction. There will be questions, investigations. Harrison nodded. I have contacts who can help contain this, provide explanations that won't lead to psychiatric evaluations for all of us. But he's right, we need to leave before the authorities arrive. As they made their way through the ruined conservatory, Eleanor paused at the dais where Amelia had stood. Among the scattered ritual implements lay the ceramic dancer figurine that had fallen from Eleanor's pocket during the struggle. She picked it up, surprised to find it unbroken despite everything. A reminder? Marcus asked, watching her tuck it carefully into her jacket. A connection, Eleanor corrected. To the part of my family that fought against this. To my grandmother who tried to protect us. Outside, they emerged into the dawn of a new day. The Hartwick mansion stood behind them, its imposing silhouette somehow diminished in the morning light. The mist that had haunted Eleanor's nightmares was gone, burned away by the rising sun. As they walked away from the property, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced in months: peace. The constant dread that had followed her since finding those first documents had lifted. Whether permanent or temporary, it was enough for now. What will you do? Harrison asked her as they reached his car. Eleanor looked back at the mansion one last time. Learn everything I can about my family's history. There might be other threats, other entities drawn to the Hartwick bloodline. You don't have to face them alone, Marcus said quietly. Eleanor smiled for what felt like the first time in ages. No, she agreed. I don't. As the car pulled away from the Hartwick property, Eleanor watched through the rear window as the first rays of sunlight touched the highest windows of the mansion, making them blaze with golden fire. Cleansing light, chasing away the last shadows of night.